I'm Ed Adams, and you're listening to the AFCA Podcast. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the AFCA Podcast. And on this episode, we learn more about the Obituary of Tunde Johnson. I'll break this down after the break. The AFCA Podcast is sponsored by Morgan Stanley Global Sports and Entertainment. While it seems like a metaphor at times to look at a film through a prism, The Obituary of Tunde Johnson is the exact opposite. This coming-of-age film clearly displays all of its facets of a young Nigerian American man coping with the day-to-day issues that directly affect the life and death he relives over and over. While you may have seen this type of reset-themed film before, The Obit of Tunde Johnson breaks down and examines how self-value and true self-acceptance shape the outcomes of our everyday being. Now, this film was written by Stanley Kalu while he was attending USC, where he won the Launch's $1 Million Screenplay competition. And to bring this story to life, Kalu enlisted the help of writer, director, and producer Ali LeRoi. Most people may know that name because he's the creator of the award-winning series Everybody Hates Chris. But he has tons of writing and producing credits for shows like Survivor's Remorse and The Chris Rock Show, and films like Head of State and Down to Earth. Recently, I spoke to Ali via Skype to discuss The Obituary of Tunde Johnson and his directing process and the messages contained in the film. The Obituary of Tunde Johnson stars Steven Silver, Spencer Neville, and Nicola Peltz.
Right.
But, all right. So first off, thank you for being a part of this podcast.
Right. It's fantastic.
Yeah. So before we get started in talking about the film, first tell me what really brought you to this story?
It was the launch screenplay competition. I was one of the judges for the competition. And during our process of selecting from our initial batch of submissions and then, whittling down to, the groups of finalists. And when it came down to, like our last 10 scripts that we were looking at, I was a huge advocate for Stanley's piece, just because I thought it was just special in a lot of ways. And I had never seen anything like it before. So I really loved the writing. I loved, what it was about, and just his perspective as an African kid, writing about, an experience in America. It was all of these different things, it was the part about, gender and identity, and, it was like so much stuff that was just really, really rich to look at from a young Black man's perspective. And, when we announced him as winner, I walked away from the process done. And some period of time went by. I don't know, it may have been like 4 or 6 weeks or something like that. And the founders of the launch, Jason Schumann and Zachary Green, they're producers on the film also, they called me up and they're like, "Hey, do you want to direct this?"
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, yeah. So, so we started to turn the wheels. I was actually in a deal at CBS Studios at the time. So, we had to, move some things around and make some phone calls and talk to some people. And I had to put a lot of things on pause.
Oh, wow.
So that I could take the time down to direct this film. But I'm really, really glad I did it. It was just an amazing experience.
Now, this, as a writer, most of us know you from Everybody Hates Chris. And as a writer, you look at a story one way, but as a director, you're really breaking down this film in a completely different way. So when you got Stanley's script, how did you break down this story considering how dense it is and so many themes that are going through it?
Well, you know, I think that to really pay attention to like these very simple, sort of pure things that are happening. One piece is he's caught in a time loop. Another piece is he's addicted to drugs. So one of the first things we needed to do was just in terms of the writing, try and make it clear that this this otherworldly thing that is his time loop was not connected to the fact that he was doing drugs,
Mm-hmm.
right? We didn't want people to think that that was an illusion and that he was just high,
Okay.
right? Uh, so um, so we did that, and then in terms of the gender part, I mean not the gender part of it, but the sexual identity aspect of it, him being gay and dealing with this kid at school, it's like, all right, that is a thing that he is, and when we're coming into the story, I really felt like this was a love story, you
Interesting.
know.
Okay.
Yeah, so a lot of people look at it, and the way that people describe it in the press and in the reviews, he's caught in this time loop, and it's about police brutality. I never looked at it like that, ever.
Mm.
I always looked at it as a tragic love story.
Wow.
Tunde's in love with Soren, and the thing that's literally and figuratively killing him is the fact that he can't be open and honest about it.
Yeah. Yeah. You got a point there. You got a point there. But I mean, but to do that, is what we see in this film is accepting some truths about yourself. And the thing that's really interesting about this film is we're talking about a high school kid who's really just trying to figure himself out in that kind of awkward way. But he's so many different levels of other. He's black and he's an immigrant.
Right.
He's from an immigrant family, and he's gay. And all those layers kind of help to build him. And I was
Right.
curious because all of those things lead to certain tensions. And I wanted to know when you were working and starting to start piecing out the scenes of this film, how did you manage the tension? Because there's a tension between his sexuality and where those pieces end up. But there's also this tension as we prepare for every time he dies.
Right. Well, first of all, I guess the idea of the idea of other is rooted in cis white male patriarchy type of shit. You know what I mean? Right? It's like if we start there, then it's like if that becomes the default definition of being, then anything that lands outside of that is increasing degrees of other, right? And so I didn't really deal with it in that way. For me, it's like I'm just dealing with his full humanity. So the thing about Tunde and Soren is that Tunde is looking to Soren, this idea of whiteness as this person and this idea,
Hmm.
the idea that being close to whiteness can save him. And what I was saying is that, like, Soren can't even save himself, right?
Right. Right.
That's what we ultimately discover in this film. And so one of the things about Tunde and the decisions that he has to make is to literally separate himself from this sinking ship in order to save his own life.
Oh,
Right,
wow.
right. Like that's literally what he has to do. And then the idea of the power that comes along with that, the acceptance that comes along with that, and the belief somehow that there is safety in that space also ties into our notions of how we relate to police, how we relate to the authorities. Our belief systems are that we're supposed to be able to look to this for safety. We're supposed to be able to look for this for comfort and protection. And in reality, it's killing us.
Hmm. Yeah.
Right.
Hmm.
So that's kind of like this duality that Tunde is sort of dealing with. So the idea that this violence visited, to against him, day after day after day, is somehow tied to this lack of acceptance,
Mm-hmm.
you know, are sort of, they're bound together. They're sort of one idea, you know.
Nice. So one of the things I thought was really interesting, this film is, by the way, is beautifully shot. And I thought I wanted to ask you about your creative process and just some of the effects that you were using to kind of to illustrate some of Tunde's inner workings.
Well, I mean, if you can be more specific about well, I mean, literally, because I had a lot of different ideas, just,
Yeah.
the way that compositionally,
Mm-hmm.
for me, I tried to construct frames that sort of had a lot of information in them, but also were very still. I do pretty serious work as a photographer.
Mm-hmm.
And so the aesthetic that I was kind of trying to bring to this film was that you could look at a frame and stay in it. And the more you look at it, like the more information you felt like you could pull out of it. You
Right.
know, just rich little ideas and details, and how close are we in a frame, or how far away are we, or how do the bodies relate to each other? How do the colors relate to each other? And it's something that you feel like you can sit and look at.
Yeah.
The other thing is that uh, this is the material is very intellectual.
Mm-hmm.
So because of that, too much, in an odd way, too much physical movement uh, takes away from the psychological movements, right? So you really have to be able to sit with the words and the ideas and the expressions and the emotions, because that's taking you on a roller coaster ride. And then every now and again, you get into, a big physical thing occurs,
Yeah.
right, and snatches you out of that. So it's really kind of playing with both of those ideas in a really strong way. When something emotional or mental or cerebral is occurring, the frames are still, the action is slow. It really, tries to let you digest that material and sit with it. People don't talk fast. They don't
Yeah.
talk a lot, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And then when things ratchet up, they ratchet up fast.
Mm-hmm.
Like it literally, there's like the violence is 0 to 60.
Very true. Very true. One of the things I thought was really interesting when talking about composition was for every resurrection, there
Uh-huh.
was a reveal.
Uh-huh.
The story expanded as he went through his next existence, time
Right.
after time after time. And one of the things that kind of stuck with me, specifically, let's talk about the deaths, were that how they mirrored well-known deaths that we've now seen, like Philando Castile and like Eric Garner. And was that intentional? Was that in the script, or did you guys decide to do that because we wanted to illustrate that commonality?
It was not in the script. That was something that I brought to Stanley, as we started to work through it. And the idea of how we dealt with the deaths uh, was the very first death in the film is very visceral. It's very up close. It's dramatic. And it feels big.
Mm-hmm.
But then what subsequently occurs is that we start to treat the deaths at a remove. Each time we find a way to kind of step back from it a bit, right? And what that sort of mirrors is the way we actually have in society become either numb or more accepting of the idea that black people are going to get killed by the cops,
Yeah.
right? And so at first it shocks us, and then not so much anymore, you know?
Mm-hmm. So that's
Then we see it again and again and again, and then ultimately in the film, it really brings it like right back up and puts it right in your face, and you can't ignore it.
one of the things that stuck with me, the other part of this resurrection was also this painting. the painting that the father had created, and the conversations between his mother and father explaining death and the relationships with this painting. And I wanted
Right.
to know first, tell me about this painting. By the way, it's amazing. And then second, was that just a plot device, or how did that painting come into the big picture of what we were trying to do with the story?
Well, for starters, the masks and the masquerades are a real thing from the culture, and so uh, what we were trying to interpret with that piece of work. That's by a Philadelphia artist known as not known as his name is actually Sean Theodore. He's known. He's the artist formerly known as
He's an
Sean Theodore.
AKA, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Sean is a brilliant photographer and artist, and how we rendered that piece in the film, it feels like a painting, but the actual work is a collage. And so the idea of death as being this, sort of an expansive idea, transitory space, something that doesn't hold this finality, you know, the way that we see it culturally, specifically in America. Death as an end, as opposed to death as a transition, and death is another space, and you go through that, and then you come back again. So we want to actually tie in culturally uh, this sort of particularly and special sort of African sensibility and how it refers to Tunde. So the idea is, if Tunde was an American character, then he might not be able to have that story because how death is treated is different in America. So he might just be dead and that would be it. But because he's African, he comes back. And the idea that the spirit lives on, that it's resurrected, and that it goes through these cycles and goes through these motions. And so the multitude of faces, the fractured reality of what that collage is kind of suggests, that idea. And then the colors as well are very specific. It's very traditional in terms of how they've been rendered. I wish I had Sean available to really speak more at length about, what he put into coming up with that piece. He did all of the artwork in the film. Uh,
Oh, wow.
and yeah, and he really put a lot of, he put a lot of thought into that, and, just researched, you know, um, researched African religions and and that cultural space to really give something that spoke to the dad's character, because the dad is an artist, right? So yeah, it's not. Bottom line is, it's not bullshit. It's actually very, very well.
So one of the things that was interesting about that and the relationship was that you made the way that the parents not only embraced Tunde's sexuality and his otherness was so eloquent in
Right.
every iteration of his life. It was very accepting, and I was wondering, when you were having these conversations as you're working out and mapping out and this story, what conversations were brought up about traditional coming out stories, or did you hear anything, or what did you bring to that conversation, and what does Stanley bring to that conversation in order to kind of flush out the mother and father characters?
Well, I mean, what Stanley was very clear about is, in African societies, uh, being gay can get you killed, like literally that. So the idea that this family is African but are now living in America and have some distance from, the cultural confines of what it means to have a child who, identifies other sexually, is something that they're able to make space for, because it's not an immediate life or death thing, right? They're in America. They know that they're in America, and they understand that in America there is space for their child to be gay and not die. Were they still in Africa, the father might have had an entirely different approach to it. The mother might have had a different perspective or idea about it, but they're not in Africa, they're in America. So, you know, there's a moment when we see this real sort of struggle with the father between uh, what he, what we can assume he knows to be a reality about, you know, his son identifying as gay sexually, and what that could mean for him, and then the reality of where he is, and you know the choice he has to empower his son and embolden him and give him confidence and support him. You know, he doesn't have to be reactionary because he hopes, you know, in the space that he's in, it's not life or death, you know. And, you know, the mother, it seems, has, you know, she knows something is going on. She doesn't know what, you know, there's always like that mother's intuition thing. And so her approach to it, you know, again, is just coming from the space of not a having to think to herself, did she do something wrong? Did she not present a particular idea? For a man to have a gay son, he has to think to himself, you know, did I do something wrong? Right? Did I, you know, was I not manly enough for him? Did I not do this? Like, how did this happen? Right?
Hmm.
And a mother doesn't necessarily have that thing, right?
Gotcha.
I mean,
Hmm.
she can, but it's not necessarily the same thing. So, you know, we're giving her a little more emotional space to embrace this idea. But more than anything else, she just wants her kid to be okay. Um, and that happens.
Right. Right.
There are actually parents who have children who are gay, and they accept them, and the kids are doing fine, and they support them, and they love them, and they tell other people, and it's okay. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
like
Absolutely.
like guess what? It's okay.
The sun will come out tomorrow.
So it's gonna be fine. You're gonna be fine. Okay. This is a wrinkle.
You know, speaking of that, you know, again, this film really does have a lot of layers and themes, and I wanted to know for you, what were some of the hardest things that you had to capture in order to maintain the honesty and the themes that you have going on in this film?
Uh, well, you know, there's a you know there's a psychological part of what's in this movie, and then there's a physical part of what's happening in this movie. And so, you know, in the psychological space, you know, the words that are being used and the words that are being shared. Uh, One thing that, you know, I was pointed with Stanley about, and we went to great lengths to make the characters non-judgmental, right? They say a lot about what their experience is, what they're going through, and how they perceive things. But if you notice, the characters seldom say what the what the other people that they're encountering. They seldom say how those people should think or behave or what they should be doing, or they don't make a lot of assumptions about what the other parties feel. Right? Everybody kind of talks from their own position, right?
Absolutely.
Here's where I am, here's how I see it. Even in the case of the Soren's dad, you know, this conservative television host, or at least that's what we believe about him, you know, he presents as a guy who has a set of beliefs, right?
Hmm.
And we can infer a lot of things about how we think that plays out in the real world for him, but we come to find out that what we could believe about him and who he actually is are two very different things, right?
Hmm.
So much so that even his own son doesn't see it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So,
Right?
yeah, I mean, so I gotta wrap up. But one of the questions I was really curious about was, you know, again, we know you from comedy, and you know, there's that old trope that comedy and tragedy are two sides of the same coin.
Yep.
And when you were working on this, I was curious, you know, do you think it was easier for you to do this drama, or is comedy harder for you?
Uh, well, they have different, the exercises are different. you know, I always say comedy is like boxing. It's the only adversarial form of entertainment.
Wow. Okay. You may get hit in the face. Got it.
No, I'm just saying, literally, comedy is the only entertainment where the audience fights back. Yeah, there's no right. So drama, on the other hand, for me, the idea of being dramatic versus melodramatic and understanding the distinctions between, how stories can play out and, and where are the stakes and what's emotional and what's corny. This film could easily look like an after school special, you know,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
easily. So you have to go to great lengths to make sure that, you're dealing with, like these difficult truths and expressing them in a way that isn't amplified, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like a lot of truth just sits out in front of us. It doesn't, you know, it's not speeches every day. There's a speech every now and again,
Mm-hmm.
but usually the hard truths are things that we encounter on a daily basis and have to try and figure out. I talked to a young girl who saw this film in Austin, and she's a teenager, and she literally was so impressed by the idea that this film seemed to capture the complexity of being young and having to deal with all of these things, identifying otherwise sexually, in his case being black and a young male in an all white environment, being gay, all of these things, being on drugs, having these complex relationships with your friends. Your best friend is sleeping with your boyfriend, and he's in the closet, and all these things. It's like, yeah, one movie could easily just pick any one of those things. Our son's on drugs, and that's the whole movie.
Right. Absolutely.
But what this girl said to me is that, yeah, this is their reality. They're dealing with all of this shit all day long, all the time.
Wow. I mean, that's a lot to unpack on that.
Yeah, so they don't have the freedom to not deal with being gay and black and on drugs and having your friends sleep with somebody else, because all that shit is happening today.
It's Tuesday. Yes.
It's Tuesday and all of this is occurring. And I hope I don't get killed on the way home.
Bam. Okay. And finally, what do you want audiences to walk away with when they see this film?
I've said this before, and it's kind of become my mantra. Um, I don't have a dictate. I don't know what anyone is going to walk away with. But what I do know is this: I view this as a piece of art, and the thing about art is that what it brings out of you, what rises up in you when you interact with a piece of work, is you should pay attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
So some people are going to look at this and feel sad. Some people might get angry. Somebody might get disgusted. Somebody might feel like this isn't true. Somebody might feel like this is oversimplified. And so what it literally does is it brings something out of you, and whatever that thing is, engage around that idea, because it's not going to be the same as the person that's next to you. I'm not trying to change the world, with this movie, but if it can foster a particular sort of a conversation, if it can open someone's mind, if it can give them an alternative perspective, that's great. But it's not up to me to determine what that's going to be, because I don't know what people's individual experiences are. I just hope that, not unlike Tunde and his parents, that they can look at this and, I guess, accept that it's real.
That's a great sentiment there. Again, that was Ali LeRoi, director of The Obituary of Tunde Johnson. This film is currently in several film festivals, and hopefully soon you can catch it in theaters and streaming platforms everywhere. And that's our show. Thanks again to Ali LeRoi for the deep dive and laughs on this episode. And did you know that Africa hosts free screenings for the public to see critically acclaimed films before they open in theaters? Well, we do. And you can find out if there is a screening in your area by following us on social media. So until next time, keep your head up.